Hello, friend. Welcome to Science for Sleep. Whether you have returned tonight or are discovering this channel for the first time, this is a quiet place to slow down, learn something gentle, and allow the day to gradually fall away. On a calm pond, a swan can look almost too perfect to be a wild animal. Its white body seems to rest on the surface without effort. Its long neck rises in a smooth curve, then bends toward a reflection that appears nearly as clear as the bird itself. If the water is still, there may be no visible sign of the feet paddling below. This is the swan most people know. It is graceful, silent, white, devoted to one partner, and peaceful until it suddenly becomes dangerous. At least, that is the familiar picture. The bird in many North American parks is usually a mute swan, recognized by its orange bill, black face markings, and the rounded black knob at the base of the bill. Its name makes it sound voiceless, but a mute swan is not truly mute. It can hiss at an animal approaching its nest, make low growls and hoarse calls, whistle softly, and produce short snorting sounds. Even when the bird says nothing, its wings may be heard. If you enjoy these quiet journeys, you're welcome to subscribe. And if it feels natural, to leave a comment sharing where you're listening from tonight. It helps others find this calm corner of science, one sleepy listener at a time. During flight, air passing through the mute swan's large wing feathers creates a steady humming or whistling rhythm. Under quiet conditions, that sound can travel for more than a mile. The mute swan also carries a less visible surprise. Although it is now familiar on lakes, rivers, and sheltered bays across parts of Canada and the United States, it did not evolve in North America. The species is native to Europe and much of Asia. People brought mute swans across the Atlantic during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, often to decorate estates, public parks, and private ponds. Some escaped or were released, and their descendants formed wild populations. The large white bird that may seem like a permanent part of an American or Canadian lake can therefore be both wild and introduced. A different swan belongs much more deeply to the North American landscape. The trumpeter swan has a black bill, a straighter-looking head profile, and a deep call that helped give the species its name. It is the largest native waterfowl in North America. Some adult trumpeter swans weigh more than 25 pounds, making them heavier than many wild turkeys and roughly twice the weight of many Canada geese. A bird that heavy does not float, feed, take off, land, and migrate through grace alone. Its calm appearance is produced by a body working continuously. The broad, webbed feet push water backward beneath the surface. The chest and belly displace enough water to support a large mass. Thousands of feathers must remain closely aligned to trap warmth and keep cold water away from the skin. The long neck must carry the head through air and water, while the bill grips plants that may be hidden below the surface. Even the famous curved posture is not fixed. A swan may fold its neck while resting, stretch it straight during flight, lower it as a warning, or send nearly its full length underwater while feeding. The shape changes because the task changes. This is where the familiar picture begins to loosen. Swans often form long pair bonds, but those bonds are not always permanent. Many species have white adults, but the black swan of Australia does not. Swans can defend nests and young with great force, but their danger to people is often exaggerated through stories repeated far more often than serious attacks occur. What looks effortless is supported by muscle, balance, buoyancy, feather care, and constant small adjustments hidden by the water. The smooth bird above the surface is real. So is the demanding animal beneath it. And before that graceful shape can be fully understood, one more familiar idea must fall away. There has never been one standard swan. The orange-billed mute swan represents only one branch of a much wider family. Its curved neck, heavy body, and broad webbed feet belong to a design shared by birds living on several continents. Biologists place swans in Anatidae, the waterfowl family that also contains ducks and geese. Members of this family share several useful features. Skin stretched between the front toes creates paddles that push against water. Broad bills contain fine structures along the edges that help handle food. Dense feathers protect bodies that spend much of the year on lakes, rivers, marshes, and sheltered coastlines. Within that family, the birds called swans form a smaller group. Scientists usually place the true swans in the genus Cygnus. A genus is a category used to gather closely related species beneath the larger family level. The exact number of swan species depends partly on where scientists draw the boundary between a full species and a regional form. A major worldwide review estimated that Earth held between 1.5 and 1.6 million swans. That review followed 8 recognized forms and included a South American bird called the Coscaroba swan. The Coscaroba has white plumage, dark legs, and a bright reddish bill. Its body resembles a small swan, although its anatomy and evolutionary history place it in a separate genus called Coscaroba. Researchers therefore sometimes describe it as an honorary swan when comparing the world's populations. The true swans spread across a wide range of climates. Mute swans developed across much of Europe and Asia, where their orange bills and black facial knobs became familiar on ponds and slow rivers. Whooper swans breed across northern Eurasia. They carry yellow and black bills and produce strong, far-carrying calls. Many travel south from Iceland, Scandinavia, Russia, and Siberia as northern water freezes. North America has its own native giants. Trumpeter swans breed across parts of Alaska, western Canada, and the northern United States. Their bills are almost entirely black, and their deep voices carry across open wetlands. An adult trumpeter may measure between 138 and 158 centimeters from bill to tail. Recorded body weights range from about 7.7 to 12.7 kilograms. Its open wings can span close to 2 meters. The tundra swan shares the same continent and a similar wide body, yet it carries less mass. Recorded tundra swans have weighed from roughly 3.8 to 10.5 kilograms. Many adults fall well below the largest trumpeters, giving them a lighter frame for seasonal journeys between Arctic breeding grounds and wintering regions farther south. Their bills are mostly black, often with a small yellow patch near the eye. Across the Atlantic, a closely related Eurasian bird is known as Bewick's swan. Many classifications treat Bewick's swan as a subspecies of the tundra swan. A subspecies is a regional population with recognizable differences that can still belong to the same broader species. Some taxonomic systems separate these birds more strongly. This shifting boundary explains why field guides may count swans differently while describing the same set of living forms. Farther south, the familiar white pattern changes. Australia's black swan carries dark plumage across most of its body, along with a red bill and white flight feathers that become especially clear when the wings open. South America's black-necked swan divides its color across the body. A white torso supports a dark head and neck, with a red knob rising above the bill. These birds still carry the long neck, buoyant body, and webbed feet associated with swans. Evolution has adjusted the shared plan through changes in color, mass, bill shape, voice, and seasonal movement. Each form meets the conditions of its own wetlands. Arctic migrants must store energy and travel between seasonal feeding grounds. Resident populations can remain near dependable open water. Large species carry more muscle and stored energy, while smaller forms lift less weight into the air. The compact tundra swan and the enormous trumpeter can look almost identical from a distant shoreline. Once their measurements are known, the same silhouette begins to conceal two very different physical loads. Every swan must support that load where water, land, and air meet. On the water, that support begins with a body shaped much like a broad boat. A swan carries most of its weight in a deep torso, packed with powerful flight muscles and large internal organs. Its wide underside spreads across the surface, allowing the water to support a considerable mass without forcing the bird to sink deeply. Dense feathers cover almost every visible part of the body. Beneath the smooth outer layer, softer feathers trap pockets of air close to the skin. This trapped air helps preserve warmth and contributes a small amount of buoyancy. Only the upper back, wings, neck, and head remain clearly visible when the bird is settled. The rest of the body sits low enough for the water to carry it, while the breathing openings and most of the plumage remain dry. At the rear is a short tail, far smaller than the long tail feathers carried by birds such as pheasants. Its compact shape helps guide the body during flight, without creating much extra drag in the water. The legs sit farther back than many people expect. On a mute swan, they are short and positioned well behind the center of the torso. Underwater, this placement is extremely useful. Each leg can sweep backward without striking the belly. A large webbed foot opens against the water like a paddle. As the foot pushes back, the body moves forward. During the return stroke, the toes draw closer together, reducing the amount of water they must move through. A slowly swimming swan may alternate its feet in a steady rhythm. Faster movement requires stronger strokes, especially when the bird is driving away another swan or preparing to leave the surface. This arrangement creates a clear physical trade-off on land. With the feet positioned behind the main body mass, the bird cannot place them directly beneath its center as easily as a chicken or crow can. The torso rises into a more upright position. Each step shifts the weight from side to side, producing the rolling gait often seen when mute swans leave the water. The movement can look uncertain from a distance, although the bird remains capable of traveling with purpose. Swans graze in fields, cross strips of land between ponds, and walk over shorelines to reach nesting areas. Trumpeter swans have even been observed traveling more than a mile on foot, with cygnets less than a week old. Those young birds had only recently left the nest, yet the adults could guide them across land when changing water conditions made the journey necessary. The same rear set legs that create a rolling walk become valuable during takeoff. A large swan begins by leaning forward and beating its wings. Its webbed feet strike the surface repeatedly, pressing against the water while the body gathers speed. For several seconds, the bird skims forward, as its feet continue pushing and its wings take on more of the weight. The feet provide firm surface contact until airflow over the wings produces enough lift to raise the entire body. Once airborne, the bird's shape changes. Its legs extend behind the short tail, where they create less resistance against the air. The wings of a large trumpeter swan can spread across nearly 2 meters. Its neck reaches straight ahead. Herons usually fly with the neck folded into a deep curve, bringing the head close to the shoulders. Swans ordinarily keep the neck fully extended, creating a long line from the bill to the tail. This position helps balance the heavy torso around the wings. It also makes a flying swan easy to recognize from far below, even when distance hides the color of its bill. The same arrangement of weight continues to guide the bird after it settles back onto the water. A broad underside supports the torso, while the rearward legs deliver strong strokes below the surface. During takeoff, those legs and feet provide the first burst of forward speed. In the air, the extended neck helps balance the body. Once the swan is floating again, the neck becomes the only major part of the bird able to travel far below the waterline while the torso remains at the surface. Its length determines how much of the underwater world the swan can reach. That reach begins when the familiar S-shaped curve slowly opens. A resting swan may hold its neck in a loose bend, with the head close to the body. During flight, the same neck forms a straight line ahead of the chest. When feeding begins, it changes shape again. The head lowers first, followed by one section of the neck after another, until the bill touches the surface. Near the shoreline, a swan can graze without submerging its head. It may clip grass from a bank or collect floating leaves from the thin layer where water meets air. A little farther out, the bill dips below the surface while the eyes remain above it. This shallow feeding allows the bird to inspect plants growing only a few centimeters down. As the food lies deeper, the head disappears and the neck follows. The swan can remain almost level while its bill searches through submerged stems beneath the breast. From the shore, the body may appear to glide forward without a head, leaving only the white back and a narrow opening where the neck entered. Greater depth produces a more dramatic posture. The swan tips its chest downward and raises its tail into the air. Its feet paddle lightly to keep the body balanced, while the neck points toward the bottom. This position is called upending. Many dabbling ducks feed in the same general way, although a swan's longer neck gives it access to a deeper layer. The black swan of Australia provides a clear example. An adult may reach roughly 140 centimeters from the bill to the end of the tail. The head and neck account for about half of that length. When the bird upends, this long front section can reach aquatic plants growing close to 1 meter below the surface. Its body stays buoyant above while the neck works through the water beneath it. That reachable space forms the swan's feeding envelope. A feeding envelope is the volume around an animal from which it can collect food without moving its whole body elsewhere. For a swan in shallow water, the envelope extends across the surface, along the bank, and downward through much of the plant-filled zone. A shorter-necked duck feeding beside it may reach the upper leaves while the swan collects stems or roots farther below. This difference can reduce direct competition between birds sharing the same pond. Each species can use a different depth even when they are feeding among the same plant beds. Swans gain this reach while remaining surface-feeding birds. Diving ducks use another method. A canvasback or scaup pushes its entire body underwater with its feet, then swims below the surface to find food. The swan usually keeps its torso afloat. Its head and neck cross the waterline, while the lungs, wings, and most insulating feathers remain above it. This feeding style works especially well in broad, shallow wetlands. Trumpeter swans often choose breeding areas where much of the water is less than about 6 feet deep. These places may include marshes, quiet lake margins, beaver ponds, and slow sections of rivers. Sunlight can reach the bottom of shallower water, allowing pondweeds and other aquatic plants to grow within the swan's range. The wetland may also provide open water for takeoff and raised vegetation for nesting. Depth still creates a firm limit. A plant growing several meters below the surface lies beyond the reach of an upending swan. Deep water may contain abundant vegetation, while offering little usable food to a bird that seldom dives. Seasonal changes matter as well. Falling water can bring roots within reach, while flooding may place the same food below the feeding envelope. The curve of the neck therefore changes with water level, plant growth, and the position of a meal. Its length allows the bird to search a large underwater space while keeping a heavy body supported at the surface. Once the bill reaches a stem, leaf, root, or buried tuber, distance is no longer the main problem. The food must still be loosened from sediment, gripped securely, and separated from mud before it can be swallowed. Beneath the surface, the bill enters a crowded layer of stems, leaves, and fine sediment. Pondweeds may rise from the bottom in long, flexible strands, while algae coat stones and older plant surfaces. Lower down, roots spread through the mud. Some aquatic plants also store energy in thick underground parts called rhizomes and tubers. A rhizome is a horizontal stem growing beneath the sediment. A tuber is a swollen storage structure rich in starch, much like a small underwater potato. Trumpeter swans feed across this entire plant. They clip soft leaves near the surface, pull at submerged stems, and search along the bottom for roots and buried storage parts. Their bills are broad and strong enough to grip vegetation that bends with the water. Along the bill edges are rows of small, comb-like structures called lamellae. These structures help hold food while water and loose mud escape around it. A swan can close its bill on a pondweed stem, pull backward with the neck, and tear away a section. The movement may look slow from above, although the submerged head is repeatedly feeling, gripping, and adjusting. Sediment often clouds around the bill. Visibility can fall within seconds as fine particles rise from the bottom. The bird can continue feeding by touch, using the sensitive tissues in its bill to locate plant material hidden in the cloudy water. Its feet may join the search. A trumpeter swan sometimes paddles in place with short, forceful strokes aimed toward the bottom. This behavior is often called foot pumping. Currents created by the webbed feet wash loose, sediment away, and help free roots that are anchored in mud. Once a plant begins to lift, the neck supplies the pulling force needed to bring part of it upward. Feeding continues on land when useful food lies beyond the shoreline. Trumpeter swans can graze on grasses and dig for tubers in damp soil. During autumn and winter, some move into harvested fields where spilled corn, wheat, or other grain remains after farm machinery has passed. Agricultural food can provide a dense source of energy when aquatic plants are harder to reach beneath ice or deep water. The disturbance around a feeding swan rarely ends with that individual. Small pieces of torn vegetation drift away. Buried insects and other tiny animals may become exposed when sediment is stirred. Nearby ducks sometimes gather around the working swan and collect material that would have remained out of reach. A large bird feeding alone may therefore create a temporary feeding patch for several smaller birds. Repeated grazing can also change the plant bed itself. One swan removing a few stems leaves a small opening that may regrow. A flock returning to the same shallow area day after day can remove far more leaves, roots, and new shoots than the plants replaced during that period. Studies of mute swans have recorded clear local losses of submerged vegetation, where many birds concentrated their feeding. The outcome depends strongly on conditions within that particular wetland. Plant growth is usually faster during warm, bright parts of the year. Recovery slows when water becomes cold or cloudy. A flock feeding for several weeks can create a different result from a pair passing through for one afternoon. Water depth, plant species, sediment type, and the size of the feeding area also influence how much change remains after the birds leave. This makes swan grazing an ecological process rather than a single fixed effect. In some places, removal stays limited to a small patch. Elsewhere, heavy feeding can reduce shelter and food used by fish, insects, and other waterfowl until the vegetation grows back. The smooth movement above the surface now rests over a busy pattern of pulling, stirring, and swallowing. During those hours, the swan repeatedly dips its head, splashes its breast, and sends water across its back. Cold water would quickly draw heat from an unprotected body. Survival depends on keeping the feather covering aligned, insulated, and ready for the next long period afloat. After feeding, a swan often turns its attention from the pond bottom to its own feathers. The bill moves across the chest, along the back, and beneath each wing. Every stroke helps restore a covering that has been bent, soaked, or coated with fine mud. Near the base of the tail sits a small structure called the uropygial gland. This gland produces an oily material used during preening. A swan reaches backward, touches the gland with its bill, and then carries a thin layer of oil through the plumage. The oil helps, although the feather arrangement does most of the work. Each outer feather has a central shaft with rows of smaller branches extending from both sides. Those branches carry even finer hooks that fasten neighboring parts together. When the tiny connections line up, the feather forms a smooth surface that water struggles to pass through. A swan uses its bill almost like a comb, drawing separated parts back into place. Outer feathers overlap like roof shingles. Rain and pond water run across them toward the edges of the body. Below that surface lies a softer layer of down. Down feathers have loose, fluffy branches that trap still air close to the skin. Air conducts heat poorly, so this trapped layer slows the movement of body warmth into cold water. The swan can maintain a body temperature of roughly 40 to 41 degrees Celsius, even while floating through water only a few degrees above freezing. That protection depends on continual care. Mud can press feather branches apart. Broken feathers leave small gaps. A patch that stays out of position allows water to move closer to the down and skin. The bird then loses heat more quickly and must burn more stored energy to remain warm. Cold conditions make that cost especially important. A swan resting through a winter night cannot replace lost heat with movement alone. Its feathers must keep working while the muscles are quiet. Preening also removes loose pieces of skin and small parasites. The bird may bathe by lowering its chest, rolling slightly, and throwing water over its back with the wings. Afterward, it shakes, lifts the plumage, and begins arranging the feathers again. This cycle can occupy a substantial part of the day because a large swan carries thousands of feathers across a broad body and wings that may span close to 2 meters. Even careful maintenance cannot preserve each feather forever. Sunlight weakens the material. Friction wears the edges. Repeated flight bends the long feathers that provide lift. The damaged set must eventually be replaced through molt, the regular process in which old feathers fall out and new ones grow. Mute swans usually complete their main wing molt during summer. Their largest flight feathers are replaced in a concentrated period rather than one at a time across the entire year. This schedule removes flightability for roughly 6 to 8 weeks. The bird remains healthy while the wings temporarily lose the broad, continuous surface needed to hold air. New feathers grow from living tissue supplied with blood. During early growth, each feather is protected inside a sheath and requires protein and energy to develop. Once growth is complete, the blood supply withdraws and the feather becomes a light, durable structure made largely from keratin, the same type of protein found in human hair and fingernails. Flightlessness changes how the swan uses its surroundings. Open water becomes temporary shelter. A fox or dog must enter the water to approach, while the swan can swim away with powerful strokes from its rear-set feet. Wide lakes and marshes also provide room to feed without traveling over land. In many breeding pairs, the female begins her wing molt first, while the male follows later. This staggered timing reduces the period when both adults are unable to fly. The exact schedule varies with breeding condition, location, and species. By late summer, the new wing feathers have opened and hardened. The swan can spread a complete surface into the air again. Water has supported its weight throughout the vulnerable weeks. Now the bird must create enough speed and lift to carry that weight beyond the surface. With a complete set of new flight feathers, the swan begins testing the wings that will carry its full weight. It lifts them high above its back, then drives them downward with enough force to disturb the water around its body. A small bird can sometimes leave a branch with one quick jump. A trumpeter swan begins from a floating position while carrying more than 11 kilograms of bone, muscle, feathers, and stored energy. Adult males average more than 26 pounds. Moving that mass into the air requires a long burst of coordinated effort. The swan leans forward and opens its wings. Large webbed feet begin pushing against the water. Each foot strikes the surface, presses backward, then rises for the following step. The impacts arrive in a fast sequence that can sound like a large animal galloping across the lake. At first, the body remains almost fully supported by water. Forward speed gradually increases as the feet continue running and the wings beat through wide arcs. Air begins flowing more quickly across the upper and lower surfaces of each wing. That moving air produces lift, the upward force that supports a flying animal. For takeoff to succeed, lift must become strong enough to balance the swan's weight. A heavier bird generally needs more forward speed, greater wing force, or a large wing surface to reach that point. Trumpeter swans have wingspans close to 2 meters, giving them a broad area for pushing air downward. Their powerful chest muscles pull the wings through each downstroke. Even with those advantages, the bird may run across the surface for roughly 100 meters before becoming fully airborne. That distance is close to 100 yards, or nearly the full length of an American football field. The first part of the run leaves a chain of splashes behind the bird. As speed builds, the body rides higher. The feet touch the surface for shorter moments until the final steps pass through open air. Only then can the legs fold back and the wings take over the entire load. The lake has served as a runway. Its surface gave the feet something to push against, while the wings gathered the airflow needed for lift. This requirement affects where large swans can settle. A pond may contain thick beds of pondweed and safe nesting vegetation, while offering too little open distance for takeoff. Tall reeds, trees, cliffs, docks, or buildings near the water can shorten the usable path. Narrow ponds can force the bird to turn before it has reached enough speed. Trumpeter swans often favor broad wetlands, open lake margins, slow rivers, and marshes with clear stretches of water. During winter, ice changes the available runway. A partly frozen lake may leave only a small opening around a spring, river inlet, or moving current. Several swans can gather in these ice-free areas because the open water provides access to food and a place to launch. A shrinking opening creates greater difficulty for a heavy bird that needs a long acceleration path. Wind also changes the takeoff. A swan usually benefits from running into the wind because air already moves across the wings before the bird reaches its full ground speed. A following wind offers less help and may lengthen the run. Landing requires space as well. The swan approaches with its feet extended and wings spread wide. Its webbed feet meet the surface first and slide forward while the wings slow the body. Large size limits how quickly the bird can change direction during these moments. Power lines crossing wetlands can become dangerous because the thin wires may be difficult to see against trees, clouds, or dim evening light. Swans also collide with fences, bridges, and other structures placed along familiar flight paths. Their flight is strong once established, though the transition between water and air leaves less room for sudden turns. When a trumpeter finally clears the surface, each wing beat carries the body higher. The feet disappear beneath the tail, the neck extends forward, and the lake begins to fall away below. That departure produces far more than splashing. Feet strike the surface, feathers press through air, and large wings create a rhythm that can travel across the surrounding water. The supposedly silent swan announces its movement through nearly its entire body. That moving body produces a whole layer of sound across the water. The name mute swan describes a bird that is quieter than several of its relatives. It does not describe a bird without a voice. A mute swan can produce a low, muffled bugle when another swan enters its territory. At close range, the sounds become rougher. A bird guarding a nest may hiss through an open bill or release an explosive snort toward an approaching dog, boat, or person. Low growls sometimes accompany a slow advance across the water. Softer whistles help maintain contact when no immediate threat is present. These calls begin in the bird's respiratory system. Air moves from the lungs through a vocal organ called the syrinx, which sits near the point where the windpipe divides toward the lungs. Thin tissues inside the syrinx vibrate as air passes through them. Muscles adjust the tension and position of those tissues, changing the pitch and character of the sound Birds use a syrinx rather than the larynx that produces the human voice. The result depends partly on the shape of the windpipe and the amount of air moving through it. Mute swan calls usually remain softer and less far-carrying than the voices of trumpeter or tundra swans. A female attending cygnets uses distinct brood calls that help keep the young nearby. Newly hatched cygnets answer with light peeps and whistles. Those small contact sounds matter when reeds block the view or several grey young are feeding around the same adult. A parent can hear that a cygnet has fallen behind before the bird becomes clearly visible. The trumpeter swan produces a deeper and more resonant voice. Its scientific name is Cygnus buccinator. The second word comes from a Latin term connected with a trumpeter, reflecting the bird's strong call. Trumpeter swans use these sounds to maintain contact between partners and family members, especially when distance or vegetation separates them. Tundra swans generally sound higher. Their calls often have a quavering quality, with notes that rise and fall more quickly than the deep voice of a trumpeter. A migrating flock can exchange these calls while flying in a loose line or resting on open water. Sound allows one bird to track the position of another when darkness, fog, or distance makes vision less reliable. Several useful signals come from movement rather than the vocal tract. A mute swan's flight feathers create a steady rhythm as the wings open and close. Air passes between the long outer feathers during every stroke, producing a humming or whistling sound. Under calm conditions, that wing rhythm may carry for more than a mile. Nearby birds can hear an approaching swan before its white body becomes clear against the sky. Feet also produce information. During a forceful landing or territorial arrival, a swan may slap the surface with its webbed feet. The impact sends a sharp sound across the pond and throws up a burst of water. Other swans can interpret the speed, direction, and posture of the arriving bird, along with that noise. Visual signals often accompany the sound. A mute swan may raise its wings into a curved display over the back, while holding the neck in a firm arch. This posture makes the body appear broader and shows that the bird is alert and prepared to defend its space. The signal can prevent closer contact by giving another animal time to move away. A lake holding several swans, therefore, contains a steady exchange of information. Some messages travel through vibrating tissue inside the body. Others come from feathers pressing through air or feet meeting water. Pairs and families learn to respond to these sounds at close range. Seasonal movement eventually stretches that contact across rivers, coastlines, and entire regions. A family leaving one lake may continue far beyond the surrounding hills. The adults climb first, while the young hold close enough to follow their calls and wing beats. Below them, one wetland gives way to farmland, rivers, reservoirs, and distant coastlines. For many swans, home is a connected chain of places used at different times of year. Tundra swans provide one of the clearest examples. They breed across the Arctic tundra of Alaska and northern Canada, where summer brings long daylight, shallow ponds, and a brief burst of plant growth. By autumn, freezing water begins to close those feeding areas. Eastern tundra swans travel toward the Atlantic coast, with large numbers wintering around Chesapeake Bay and the coastal plain of North Carolina. Western populations move toward the Pacific Northwest and California. During these journeys, the birds use broad rivers, inland lakes, estuaries, and flooded agricultural fields as temporary stopping places. An estuary is a coastal area where fresh river water mixes with salt water from the sea. These sheltered waters can hold aquatic plants and open feeding space after smaller northern ponds have frozen. Migration depends on energy management. A swan must carry enough stored fuel to complete each flight, while preserving the strength needed to land, feed, and leave again. Fat stored beneath the skin and around internal organs supplies much of that energy. Long flights use these reserves quickly, so migration usually unfolds in stages. A flock may travel for several hours, descend onto a lake, and remain there until feeding has replaced part of the energy that was spent. Wind can shorten or lengthen that stop. A strong wind from behind reduces the effort required to cover distance. A headwind increases the cost of every kilometer and may keep the birds resting until conditions improve. Whooper swans follow similar seasonal pressures across Eurasia. Some breed in Iceland and cross the North Atlantic toward Britain and Ireland. Others nest across Scandinavia and northern Russia before moving toward Western Europe, the Black Sea region, or East Asia. Their loud calls help family members remain together during travel and after landing among larger winter flocks. Buick swans breed even farther north across the Russian Arctic. Many move toward the Netherlands, Germany, and Britain, while other populations travel south through Eastern Asia. Buick swans are closely related to tundra swans and are often treated as a Eurasian form of the same broader species. Their smaller bodies carry less weight than the largest trumpeter swans, which changes the energy required for takeoff and sustained flight. Trumpeter swans show more variation in movement. Some populations travel hundreds of kilometers between breeding and wintering areas. Others remain within the same broad region and shift only when ice covers their feeding water. Pairs often migrate with their young. Several families may gather near a river inlet, deep lake, or warm spring, where moving water keeps part of the surface open. A winter flock may appear settled for weeks, then depart after colder weather closes the remaining shallows. Mute swans often travel shorter distances. Many remain near the same lake or river throughout the year, when food and open water remain available. Freezing conditions can push them toward larger rivers, sheltered bays, or coastal water. Their movement responds directly to local conditions, rather than a fixed need to cross a continent every year. The young birds gain experience during these seasonal shifts. Cygnets that learn to fly in late summer may remain with their parents through the following winter. They follow adults toward known feeding grounds and safe resting water. Repeated travel gives them information that cannot be carried in feathers or muscle alone. A young swan learns where open water usually remains, which fields hold spilled grain, and where a long takeoff path is available. Weather can still change the route. Early ice may force a quicker departure. Warm autumn conditions can delay movement by leaving plants accessible farther north. Food shortages may send a family onward even when the water remains open. Migration therefore grows from a series of environmental thresholds. Temperature, wind, ice, and feeding success gradually alter the balance between staying and leaving. The swan seen resting on one quiet pond may carry knowledge of wetlands spread across thousands of kilometers. Those roots extend far beyond the northern white birds that shape the most familiar image of a swan. Far to the south, an Australian wetland carries the same long neck shape in a very different color. The bird moving through the reeds is a black swan, known scientifically as Cygnets atratus. It is native to Australia and occurs across much of the continent, wherever suitable open water and aquatic plants are available. An adult may measure between roughly 120 and 142 centimeters from bill to tail. Its body is covered mainly in dark feathers. The bill is deep orange-red with a pale tip and a narrow white band crossing near the front. When the bird rests with its wings folded, the plumage can appear almost completely black. Takeoff reveals a hidden contrast. Broad white flight feathers open along the wings as the swan runs across the water. Each downstroke exposes bright white sections that were covered while the bird floated. From a distance, the change can seem sudden. A dark body rises from the lake, then flashes white with every beat of its wings. This coloring belongs to the normal adult form of the species. Black swans breed, feed, migrate locally, raise young, and defend nesting water in the same ordinary biological sense as white swans elsewhere. Their appearance comes from the way pigment is produced and placed inside growing feathers. One important bird pigment is melanin. Melanin creates many black, brown, and grey shades. It is deposited while a feather develops from the skin. Once the feather finishes growing, its color pattern is already fixed. The dark body feathers of a black swan contain much more visible melanin than the body feathers of an adult trumpeter or mute swan. Its white flight feathers contain little or no dark pigment. Color can therefore change sharply across different parts of one bird. South America holds an even clearer example. The black-necked swan has a bright white body beneath a black head and neck. A reddish growth called a knob sits at the base of the bill, especially prominently in adult males. These swans occur in wetlands through southern South America, including parts of Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, and the Falkland Islands. Their body shape remains unmistakably swan-like. A long neck reaches into shallow water. Large webbed feet drive the bird forward. Broad wings carry it between lakes, marshes, and sheltered coastal areas. Shared ancestry and anatomy place these birds among swans, while pigment gives each species its visible pattern. Even the white northern species spend part of their lives without the color people expect. Young mute swans commonly hatch with grey-brown down. Their juvenile feathers remain duller than those of the adults around them. White plumage develops gradually as new feathers replace the first covering. Trumpeter cygnets are usually mouse grey when they leave the egg, although a pale form also occurs. Young tundra swans carry grey across the head, neck, and body during their first months. Winter may find them travelling beside white parents while their own feathers still show the colour of youth. Black swan cygnets begin in soft grey down as well. Their plumage darkens as they grow, while the white wing feathers and red adult bill become more distinct. A swan's colour can therefore reveal both species and age. Feathers also wear and change shade between molts. Mud, iron-rich water, and plant material may stain pale plumage around the head and neck. A swan feeding in mineral-rich water can appear rusty or brown even when the feathers themselves grew white. The familiar white adult is one outcome among several. Dark pigment covers the Australian species. South American birds divide black and white across the body. Juveniles pass through grey and brown stages before reaching adult colour. These different surfaces grow over the same general structure shaped for buoyancy, feeding, and flight. One behavior also appears across much of this varied family. Two adults may remain together through breeding seasons, migrations, and years of repeated nesting, creating the lasting pair that became the swan's strongest human symbol. As two adult swans draw close, their long necks may curve toward each other above the water. From the right angle, the space between them resembles a heart. That image has helped make swans a symbol of lifelong romance. The real partnership is built through repeated work across many seasons. Most swans form socially monogamous pairs. Social monogamy means that one male and one female maintain a breeding partnership and behave as a pair. They may remain together while defending a territory, preparing a nest, raising young, or traveling between seasonal habitats. A stable partner offers several practical advantages. An established pair already knows how the other bird responds when danger approaches. One adult may move toward an intruder, while the other stays nearer the eggs or cygnets. Their warning calls, body positions, and swimming movements become familiar through repetition. Coordination can begin before an egg is laid. The pair may return to a nesting territory used in an earlier year and recognize the same channels, feeding areas, and sheltered shorelines. Less time is needed to establish a new relationship or discover how an unfamiliar partner behaves. That saved time can matter during a short northern breeding season. Trumpeter swans commonly begin forming pair bonds when they are around 3 or 4 years old. Successful breeding may begin later, once the birds are mature enough to defend suitable habitat and complete the demands of nesting. A large wetland can still contain only a limited number of safe nest sites. Young pairs may spend several seasons gaining experience before raising a brood. Once a partnership succeeds, staying together can preserve the value of that experience. Long-term records of mute swans show how often this happens. During one 7-year study, 85% of paired breeding birds kept the same mate from 1 year to the next when that partner was still alive. The pattern was strong, although it was never absolute. About 3% of breeding pairs separated during the study. Among pairs that had not yet bred, the recorded separation rate was closer to 9%. Biologists sometimes call this separation divorce. The word describes two surviving birds ending their partnership and forming different pair bonds. Breeding success can influence that decision. A pair that repeatedly fails to secure territory or raise young may gain more from changing partners than a pair with a successful history. Age can matter as well. Mute swans choosing new partners after death or separation tended to pair with birds closer to their own age than random chance would predict. An experienced older bird may therefore join another bird with a similar stage of life and breeding history. The death of a partner also changes the family structure. A widowed swan may eventually form a new bond, sometimes within the same breeding area. Other individuals remain alone for a season or longer. The result depends on available partners, age, health, territory, and local population size. Trumpeter swans also maintain partnerships that commonly last for years. Marked individuals have revealed documented mate changes, showing that the same flexibility exists in another species. A new pair must gradually establish the coordination that an older partnership already possessed. Calls become recognizable. Distances during feeding and travel become easier to manage. Responses to unfamiliar swans grow more predictable. These small adjustments build a working relationship over time. The heart-shaped pose captures only a brief surface moment. Beneath it lies a partnership, tested through migration, territorial pressure, failed attempts, and successful broods. Its durability comes from the value of two experienced birds acting together. That cooperation soon becomes visible along the edge of the wetland, where reeds, stems, and soaked vegetation begin gathering into a broad mound above the water. The first pieces are often pulled from within a few body lengths of the chosen site. One adult tears loose reeds or sedges while the other carries wet stems toward a low rise surrounded by shallow water. The pair may inspect several places before construction settles into a steady routine. A small island can provide firm ground. A floating mat of dead vegetation offers another foundation, especially when roots and tangled stems hold it together. Trumpeter swans also build on muskrat houses, beaver dens, and the raised edges of beaver dams. These structures already stand above the surrounding water. A muskrat house is a mound of marsh plants and mud built as shelter. Its packed center can support the first layer of a swan nest. Beavers create larger changes. A dam slows flowing water and raises the level behind it, while a lodge or bank den may leave a broad, stable surface near feeding shallows. The swans receive a ready-made base created by another animal's work. Artificial nesting platforms can serve the same purpose in wetlands where natural foundations are scarce. People usually anchor these platforms above shallow water and cover them with vegetation, so the birds can add their own material. Water surrounding the site provides a useful barrier. A fox, raccoon, or loose dog must wade or swim before reaching the nest. The adults can usually detect that approach across open water and move between the intruder and the mound. Shallow water also gives the pair quick access to submerged food. A nest placed too far into deep water may become difficult to build or repair. A site crowded against shore can be easier for land predators to reach. The pair therefore balances several needs within one small part of the wetland. The foundation must remain stable as water rises or falls. Food should be available within manageable traveling distance. Enough open surface must remain nearby for the long takeoff run required by a heavy swan. Both adults gather building material. They pull up aquatic plants, collect dead reeds, and carry clumps of soaked vegetation in their bills. The male often delivers much of the material toward the site. The female commonly shapes the center by turning, pressing, and arranging the vegetation around her body. A shallow bowl gradually forms where the eggs will rest. Construction can continue for roughly 14 to 35 days. Rain may flatten part of the mound. Wind can loosen exposed stems. Changing water levels may require new layers to keep the center dry. The adults continue adding material after the first eggs appear, especially around the outer rim. A completed trumpeter swan nest can approach 11 feet across. That is wider than many small bedrooms. The mound may rise close to 3 feet above its base, although much of the lower material can remain wet or partly submerged. Its size reflects the body it must support. An adult weighing more than 20 pounds needs a broad platform that will not collapse as it turns the eggs or settles down to incubate them. The central bowl is much smaller than the full mound. Soft plant matter lines the area directly beneath the female. Down feathers may be added as laying and incubation continue. The surrounding mass helps separate the eggs from cold water and gives the sitting bird room to shift position without rolling them over the edge. A successful site can become part of the pair's long-term territory. Some swans return to the same foundation in later years. Old vegetation compresses and decays between breeding seasons, so the structure must be repaired and raised again. A reused mound may grow larger as fresh layers are added over the remains of earlier nests. The wetland now contains a physical record of repeated partnership. Beaver activity may have shaped the water. A muskrat house may have supplied the first dry rise. Weeks of swan labor turn that foundation into a nursery. When the mound is finished, the work becomes less visible and more exact. For more than a month, each developing egg must remain within a narrow range of warmth, moisture, and gas exchange. The first egg settles into the central bowl with a quiet weight of its own. A trumpeter swan egg is roughly 10 to 13 centimeters long, larger than the egg of a domestic chicken, and enclosed by a thick, pale shell. The female usually lays one egg at a time, often with a gap of about 2 days between them. A complete clutch commonly contains 4 to 6 eggs. Because laying takes several days, the earliest egg may remain cooler at first while the rest of the clutch is completed. Steady incubation begins when the female settles for long periods and starts holding the eggs within a carefully controlled pocket of warmth. Incubation is the period when heat from the adult allows the embryos to grow. The female performs most of this continuous warming. She leaves briefly to drink, feed, bathe, or rearrange material around the nest. The male usually remains nearby, watching the surrounding water and responding when another swan or possible predator approaches. For a trumpeter swan, development commonly lasts between 32 and 37 days. Mute swans generally incubate somewhat longer, with recorded periods of roughly 34 to 41 days. During those weeks, the egg must stay warm enough for cells to divide and organs to form. Excessive heat can damage living tissue, while prolonged cooling slows development and may stop it entirely. Most birds transfer body heat through a brood patch, an area on the abdomen where feathers thin or fall away during the breeding season. Bare skin then rests directly against the eggs. Trumpeter swans use a less familiar method. The female brings her broad, webbed feet over the clutch and places them against or around the eggs. Warm blood moving through the feet helps transfer heat, while she settles her body above them. She also uses those feet to turn and reposition the eggs. Turning prevents the growing embryo from remaining pressed against one side of the shell and helps internal tissues develop in the proper position. The shell appears solid, although it contains thousands of microscopic pores. These tiny openings connect the life inside with the air around the nest. Oxygen passes inward and supports the embryo's metabolism, the chemical work that releases energy from nutrients. Carbon dioxide produced by that work moves outward. Water vapor also escapes through the pores. This loss must happen slowly and within a useful range. As water leaves, an airspace grows at the broad end of the egg. Near hatching, the cygnet breaks into that airspace and takes its first breaths before opening the outer shell. Humidity around the nest affects the speed of water loss. Very dry air can remove water too quickly and leave the developing chick dehydrated. High humidity may prevent enough water from escaping, leaving too little airspace for the final stage of hatching. The nest mound helps soften these changes. Wet vegetation below holds moisture, while the raised bowl keeps the eggs away from direct contact with cold water. The female adjusts conditions through her posture, the length of her absences, and the way she covers the clutch. Work with artificially incubated swan eggs has shown how narrow the safe conditions can be. Eggs stored too long before incubation often hatch less successfully. Bacteria entering through dirt or damaged shell can multiply in the warm interior. Humidity must be controlled, and the egg must lose an appropriate amount of water across the full incubation period. Caretakers can track that loss by weighing an egg repeatedly, turning an invisible process into a measurable change of only a few grams at a time. Inside, the cygnet grows from a small cluster of cells into a bird with eyes, down, webbed feet, and a working bill. Muscles strengthen as space becomes tighter. The chick begins making small movements and may produce faint sounds that can be heard through the shell. A temporary hard point on the bill, called an egg tooth, helps open the first crack. After more than a month of regulated warmth and careful turning, the shell begins to break. The young swan enters the wetland prepared for a sudden change of pace, because rest inside the egg gives way to movement within hours. Beside the broken shell, a newly hatched cygnet rests in damp grey down. Most trumpeter cygnets are mouse grey at hatching, although a smaller number emerge almost white. Their eyes are open or partly open, and their legs can already support the body. This advanced condition is called precocial development. A precocial bird hatches with enough strength and coordination to move soon after leaving the egg. Within about 24 hours, trumpeter cygnets may climb down from the nest and enter the water. Their first swim begins before the down has been replaced by true juvenile feathers. Large feet paddle beneath a body that weighs only a small fraction of an adult swan. The young can also begin feeding for themselves. They peck at soft plants near the surface and collect tiny pieces loosened by the adults. At first, choosing useful food requires guidance. A parent lowers its head into a shallow patch, and the brood follows. The adults lead them toward quiet water, where submerged leaves remain within reach and strong currents are absent. Brood calls help keep the family together when reeds hide one bird from another. A cygnet that drifts too far may answer with a soft peep while swimming back toward the adult's voice. Warmth remains important during the early days. Down traps air, although it does not yet provide the complete protection of mature plumage. Cold rain or long exposure to wind can cool a small body much faster than an adult. Cygnets may press close to a parent or shelter among vegetation. In species where backriding occurs, some also climb onto an adult's back. As the weeks pass, bones lengthen and the chest becomes deeper. Food gathered each day supplies protein for muscle growth and minerals for the developing skeleton. The small wing stubs extend outward. New feathers grow through the skin inside protective sheaths, then open into broader surfaces. Grey down gradually gives way to juvenile plumage. A young swan may look uneven during this change, with soft down still visible around newly opened feathers. Practice begins well before true flight. Cygnets stretch both wings, beat them against the air, and run short distances across the water. These movements strengthen the large breast muscles that will power the downstroke. They also help the growing bird coordinate its feet and wings while keeping the long neck balanced during acceleration. Species mature at different rates. Mute swans may become capable of flight at around 65 days after hatching. Trumpeter cygnets usually need between about 90 and 122 days. A trumpeter brood hatched in early June may therefore remain flightless until September or even early October. Water level, food supply, weather, and individual growth can shift the exact timing. The first successful takeoff often follows many unfinished attempts. A young bird runs across the surface while its wings beat rapidly. Some efforts end after a few meters, with the body settling back into the water. Eventually, speed and wing force lift the feet clear. The cygnet may remain low over the lake, following the adults through a wide circle before landing again. Flight adds a new ability without ending family dependence. Young trumpeter swans usually remain with their parents through the first winter. They travel toward open water, feeding areas, and safe resting places as one family group. During those months, the juveniles learn seasonal routes and recognize the calls that guide movement through poor visibility and changing weather. Separation usually comes the following spring, as the adults prepare for another breeding season. Brothers and sisters may continue traveling or feeding together after leaving their parents. The brood that entered the water within a day of hatching has become a group of large flying birds. Yet its first year still carries the structure of family life. While the cygnets remain small and vulnerable, that family changes the posture of both adults. Curved necks rise higher as the wings lift away from the body. A quiet approach across the water begins to carry a warning. An unfamiliar shape enters the family's part of the wetland. It may be another swan approaching along the shoreline, a dog stepping into the shallows, or a small boat drifting closer than the adults will tolerate. The guarding bird notices first. Its head rises, feeding stops, and both eyes remain fixed on the movement. This early attention is already part of the response. Distance still separates the swan from the intruder, giving both animals time to change direction before contact becomes necessary. If the approach continues, the swan's body begins to look larger. A mute swan may lift its wings into two high curves above the back, while holding the neck in a strong arch. This posture is called busking. The raised feathers broaden the outline of the bird and make its forward movement easier to see. Water piles gently against the chest as the swan swims with deliberate strokes. The display sends useful information across the surface. The bird has noticed the intrusion, claims the nearby space, and is prepared to defend it. A lowered head can make the message more urgent. The neck stretches forward, bringing the bill closer to the water. Hissing may follow when the other animal enters a shorter distance. An explosive snort or rough call can add sound to the visible warning. Some swans slap the water with their feet during an arrival or confrontation. The impact creates a sharp report and throws spray behind the body. Each part of the sequence gives the intruder another chance to retreat. The swan may then begin a direct approach. Slow movement can become a fast pursuit if the boundary continues to be crossed. Rear-set legs drive powerful strokes beneath the surface, while the raised wings keep the bird looking broad. A person watching from shore may experience this as a sudden change in temperament. For the swan, the response has usually been building through several clear stages. Breeding season makes these reactions more likely. Mute swans can defend nesting territories strongly when eggs or cygnets are present. The adult is protecting a limited area that contains a nest site, feeding shallows, and enough open water for the family to move. Another swan may threaten access to those resources. Competing water birds can also be chased from the immediate area. Many territorial interactions therefore occur between swans or between swans and other birds, rather than between swans and people. The intensity changes with circumstances. A bird beside newly hatched cygnets may react at a greater distance than the same individual would during winter. An incubating pair may defend the nest mound more strongly than an empty shoreline. A passing animal that remains far away may receive only a raised head and watchful posture. Close movement toward the brood can produce hissing and pursuit within seconds. These displays help reduce the cost of defense. Physical fighting can damage feathers, injure wings, and consume energy needed for incubation or feeding. A visible warning allows the opponent to judge the defender's readiness before either animal makes contact. Most conflicts end when one bird turns away or leaves the defended water. The posture therefore forms part of a system that prevents a more dangerous struggle. Outside the breeding period, the same swans may behave very differently. Mute swans can feed among other water birds when space and food are abundant. Winter gatherings may place several family groups in the same open bay or river channel. Territorial behavior remains possible, especially at close range, but the absence of eggs and small cygnets reduces the need to control a wide area. A swan moving calmly through open water can arrange the same neck, wings, and body into a firm defensive display when distance, season, and family needs make protection worthwhile. Raised wings, a lowered head, and a fast approach can look dramatic enough to grow into stories long after the encounter ends. The most repeated story gives the swan's wing almost legendary power, claiming that one blow can easily break a human arm. The warning survives because the animal looks powerful enough to make it believable. A large mute swan may weigh more than 10 kilograms, and each wing contains long bones driven by strong flight muscles. Near the outer part of the wing is a hard area called the carpal region. This is roughly comparable to the wrist in a human arm. During flight, the bones around that joint help control the broad outer feathers. During a close defensive encounter, the same firm region can strike with enough force to hurt. A swan may hit with a partly open wing while turning, rushing forward, or trying to push an intruder away. The impact can leave a bruise. Claws on the feet or contact with the bill may also cause scratches when a person is extremely close. A startled person can lose balance while stepping backward near a steep bank, slippery path, dock edge, or shallow water. These outcomes explain why the old warning cannot be dismissed as completely imaginary. The common version still stretches the likely result far beyond the evidence. A swan does not routinely shatter the healthy arm of an adult with one casual wing beat. Human long bones, including the humerus of the upper arm and the radius and ulna of the forearm, usually require substantial force to fracture. The result of any impact depends on how much force reaches the body and how narrowly that force is concentrated. The exact point of contact matters. Bone strength also varies with age, health, earlier injury, and conditions that reduce bone density. A person who falls may face more danger from the ground or a nearby structure than from the first contact with the bird. Children can be easier to knock off balance because of their smaller size. Older adults may have more fragile bones or less ability to recover from a sudden step. Someone standing in a canoe or at the edge of deep water may face a different risk from a person on a wide, level path. This is why possibility and typical outcome must remain separate. Under an unusual combination of force, weak bone, poor balance, and a hard landing, a swan encounter could contribute to a fracture. That possibility does not make broken arms a normal feature of swan behavior. Most territorial encounters follow the warning sequence already visible from a distance. The swan watches, raises its wings, hisses, and moves toward the animal or person entering its defended space. A faster pursuit may follow when the approach continues. The usual goal is removal. Once the intruder turns away and increases the distance, the swan often slows, lowers its wings, and returns toward the nest or brood. The strongest responses usually occur during the breeding season. A pair beside eggs has invested weeks in nest building and incubation. Adults guarding small cygnets are protecting young that cannot yet fly away. The defended area may include feeding shallows and the open route used to move the brood through the wetland. Close approaches during this period carry more meaning to the birds than the same movement would in winter. Distance prevents most conflict because it gives the display time to work. A raised wing or direct approach can be read before physical contact becomes necessary. The swan gains space without risking damage to its own feathers and bones. The approaching animal also receives a clear chance to leave. Context therefore gives a more useful picture than reputation. A swan possesses enough strength to cause pain and occasional injury. Serious attacks remain unusual, and a broken arm would require circumstances more specific than the familiar park warning suggests. As nesting ends and the young become capable of flight, the pressure around one guarded patch of water begins to ease. Pairs and families then meet other swans in flocks where the rules of distance and cooperation change again. In those larger gatherings, the defended space of spring gives way to a looser social arrangement. The cygnets are stronger, nesting has ended, and food may be concentrated in only a few useful places. An ice-free river bend or sheltered bay can draw several families toward the same water. Young swans that have left their parents may also join the gathering. Some are adolescents, still several years away from holding a territory of their own. Others are mature adults that have bred before but currently lack a partner, a nest site, or the condition needed to reproduce. These birds are often called non-breeders. The term describes their present status rather than their age. A non-breeding flock can therefore include young birds in their second summer, beside older swans with earlier nesting experience. For trumpeter swans, pair bonds commonly continue throughout the year. Two adults that nested together in spring may remain close during autumn movement and winter beside their offspring. Several such families can share a lake with Canada geese, ducks, and other waterfowl, when open water and food are limited. The crowd may contain dozens of large white bodies, yet it still holds smaller social units. Parents recognize the calls and movements of their young. Partners keep track of each other while feeding. A family may rest close together, then rise and depart as one group. Sound becomes especially useful when fog, reeds, darkness, or a crowded shoreline hides individual birds. Mute swans produce several quiet contact calls in addition to the hisses and snorts heard during defense. Females use brood calls around their young. Cygnets answer with soft whistles or peeps. Adults can also give low calls that help partners remain aware of each other's position. Posture adds another layer. After a territorial chase, a pair may meet and perform a coordinated greeting, often called a triumph display. The birds raise their heads, call, and move their necks in a shared sequence. The display can reinforce the partnership after one bird has driven away an intruder. It also makes the pair's connection visible to nearby swans. These social signals matter because a winter flock has structure. Individuals must judge distance, recognize partners, avoid unnecessary fights, and keep access to food. A swan that pushes too close may receive a warning. Another bird may be tolerated at the same distance. When food is abundant and no nest is present, the usefulness of flocking changes with the landscape. A large group can help individuals notice approaching danger because many heads scan the surroundings. Wintering together also concentrates birds around dependable water that remains unfrozen. During breeding, the same concentration would create constant competition for nests and young. Pairs then spread out and defend smaller parts of the wetland. Territoriality fits a season when nesting space is scarce and vulnerable offspring need protection. Flocking fits periods when food and open water occur in shared patches. Young swans move through both systems before becoming breeders. A trumpeter may spend several years learning seasonal routes, meeting possible partners, and developing the strength needed to claim a nesting area. Large body size alone does not guarantee a territory. The bird must find suitable shallow water, a stable nest foundation, feeding habitat, and enough open space for takeoff. Established pairs may already occupy the best sites. Until an opening appears, younger birds remain part of the wider crowd. Their lives include long stretches of social contact beyond the famous pair bond. The swan on a winter lake may belong to a family, a partnership, and a temporary gathering at the same time. This flexible social life made swans especially visible to people. Large flocks could be counted from shore, fed near towns, moved between estates, and displayed on ornamental water. A long-lived bird that gathered openly beside human settlements was almost certain to acquire meanings far beyond its biology. On European rivers, that visibility became a form of value. Large white birds gathered on open water, where people could watch them from roads, bridges, farms, and settlements. Their size made them easy to recognize. Their long pair bonds suggested loyalty, while the change from grey cygnet to white adult offered a visible image of transformation. Human culture gradually selected those traits and carried them into law, ceremony, literature, and performance. In medieval England, mute swans were valuable animals, connected with wealth and authority. The English crown's claim to unmarked mute swans swimming in open water dates back to the 12th century. Ownership mattered because swans could be raised, marked, exchanged, and served as food. A large bird placed on a banquet table displayed access to land, water, labor, and privilege. Historical feast records describe swans among the costly animals prepared for important occasions. The bird's later image as a protected decoration grew from a past in which it could also be a managed source of meat and status. Owners developed marks that identified particular birds. These marks were sometimes cut into the bill, allowing people to distinguish one group of swans from another when several shared the same river. The practice turned a moving, wild-looking bird into recognized property. 2 London livery companies retain historic swan ownership rights dating from the 15th century. A livery company is an old trade organization that developed from a medieval guild. the worshipful company of vintners was associated with the wine trade, while the worshipful company of dyers represented people who colored cloth. Along with the crown, these companies remain connected with swan-upping on the River Thames. The modern event preserves the shape of an ownership survey while serving a different practical purpose. Teams travel along part of the river and locate mute swan families. Adults and cygnets are carefully brought close enough for examination. The young birds are counted, weighed, measured, and checked for injuries or signs of poor health. Rings placed on their legs provide individual identification for later observations. A ring carries a code that allows a bird seen again in another year or location to be linked with its earlier record. This converts one day's encounter into information about survival, movement, and breeding. Swan-upping has therefore shifted from banquet culture and property rights towards census work, health assessment, and public education. The ceremony remains visually striking because the animals themselves are conspicuous. A family of large white swans beside traditional boats creates an image that is easy to remember. Literature used a different part of the swan's biology. Hans Christian Andersen's The Ugly Duckling was first published on November 11, 1843. The young bird in the tale appears awkward and out of place before growing into a swan. That transformation draws strength from a genuine change already visible in nature. Young mute swans commonly begin life covered in grey or brown down. Their juvenile plumage remains duller than the bright feathers of mature adults. Successive molts gradually replace that early covering until the familiar white body appears. The story turns this physical development into a human lesson about identity, belonging, and delayed recognition. Performance added another layer. On stage, the white swan became linked with control, balance, and elegance. Its curved neck and level movement across water could be translated into human posture and carefully practiced motion. The darker counterpart was often treated as a dramatic opposite, even though Australia's black swan is an ordinary member of the same biological group. White flight feathers are folded inside its dark wings, joining both colors in one animal. Human stories often separate traits that nature places together. The cultural swan became white, faithful, silent, and effortlessly graceful because those features produce strong symbols. Feeding mud, territorial chases, annual molt, and the long-running takeoff rarely entered the same frame. The stereotype survived because it grew from real observations that had been narrowed into a cleaner image. People eventually carried that image beyond stories and ceremonies. They transported swans between countries, bred them for ornamental water, and released them into wetlands where no mute swan had previously belonged. On North American estates, the same white birds became living ornaments. Mute swans were imported from Europe for private ponds, public parks, and landscaped lakes. Their bright plumage and calm surface movement made them desirable additions to places designed for display. Some birds escaped from captivity. Others were released when collections changed or became difficult to maintain. Once free, they found sheltered bays, slow rivers, marshes, and shallow lakes that could support breeding pairs. Wild populations gradually became established across parts of the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, Great Lakes, and Pacific Northwest. A species living outside the region where it evolved is called introduced. Introduction alone does not guarantee ecological damage. The outcome depends on population size, feeding behavior, habitat sensitivity, and the other species already using the area. Mute swans can become disruptive when many individuals concentrate in shallow wetlands. Their long necks allow them to remove leaves and stems from below the surface. Upending birds may reach deeper vegetation, while their feet stir sediment and loosen buried plant material. Repeated feeding in the same area can reduce plant biomass, meaning the total amount of living plant tissue present. These underwater beds provide shelter for young fish and small aquatic animals. They also stabilize sediment and supply food to native waterfowl. A large flock returning daily can remove vegetation faster than it regrows, especially when plant growth is already slow. The effect remains strongly local. Field studies have found heavy depletion in some feeding areas, while other wetlands showed smaller or less persistent change. Warm seasons can support faster regrowth. Large plant beds may absorb feeding pressure better than narrow or damaged ones. Water depth, flock size, plant species, and the length of time swans remain all shape the result. A pair passing through one bay does not create the same pressure as dozens of birds feeding there for weeks. Nesting behavior adds another concern. Mute swans defend space around nests and cygnets, with direct approaches, raised wings, and pursuit. On crowded islands or narrow shorelines, this behavior can displace birds that need the same limited nesting ground. Documented conflicts have involved black skimmers and least terns, in particular coastal nesting areas. Both species often nest on exposed sand, gravel, or low islands, where usable space may already be scarce. Black terns have also been driven from nesting areas in wetlands shared with territorial swans. The effect comes from repeated exclusion. A swan does not need to injure another bird to reduce its breeding opportunity. Persistent chasing can prevent a smaller species from settling, feeding nearby, or returning safely to a nest. Population growth magnifies these interactions. A successful pair can raise several cygnets in one season. Young birds eventually join non-breeding flocks, and some later establish territories of their own. When adult survival is high, and few local pressures limit growth, the population can expand steadily across connected waterways. Maryland became one of the clearest examples. The state's mute swan population grew to more than 4,000 birds before intensive management began. By 2012, the number had been reduced to fewer than 100. Management included egg addling, a method that prevents an embryo from completing development while the adults continue sitting on the nest. This can reduce repeated laying during the same season. Lethal removal was also used. Both methods created strong public controversy. Many people knew the swans as beautiful, familiar animals and found their deliberate removal difficult to accept. Wildlife managers were weighing that attachment against effects on native vegetation and nesting birds. The conflict had no simple villain. The swans were following normal feeding and territorial behavior. Human movement placed that behavior inside ecosystems, where it could operate at unfamiliar densities and against species that had not developed alongside it. Ecological responsibility, therefore, depended on evidence from each location. Some sites showed clear plant loss or displacement. Other regions required more cautious conclusions because broad effects were weaker, inconsistent, or difficult to separate from pollution, shoreline development, and changing water levels. While mute swans spread with human assistance, a native North American swan was moving in the opposite direction. By the early 20th century, the trumpeter swan had nearly disappeared from much of the continent through hunting, trade, and habitat loss. The contrast was sharpest in the trumpeter swan. While people were carrying mute swans into new parks and estates, the largest native waterfowl in North America was disappearing from much of its original range. Trumpeter swans once occupied wetlands across a broad part of the continent. Their size made them easy to locate, and their feathers, skins, and meat all had commercial value. During the 19th century, hunters killed large numbers of the birds. Long wing feathers could be shaped into writing quills. Softer feathers were used in hats and other decorated clothing. Swan skins were made into powder puffs, while the body supplied a large amount of meat. Hunting continued during breeding, migration, and winter, before modern wildlife laws placed firm limits on when and where birds could be taken. By the late 19th century, trumpeter numbers had fallen severely across the United States and southern Canada. Loss of wetlands added another pressure. Marshes were drained for farming, rivers were altered, and shallow nesting areas disappeared beneath settlement and development. A species that needed quiet water, aquatic vegetation, and a secure nest foundation was losing those conditions while direct killing continued. Legal protection began reducing some of that mortality. The Migratory Bird Treaty Act became United States law in 1918 and strengthened protection for native migratory birds. Enforcement and public attitudes developed gradually, so the trumpeter swan remained in serious danger for years afterward. The depth of the decline became clear in 1935. Only 69 trumpeter swans were known in the contiguous United States. That count did not include every surviving bird. Remote wetlands, especially across Alaska and parts of Western Canada, were difficult to search with the methods available at the time. Even with those missed populations, the number showed how close the species had come to disappearing from the lower 48 states. During that same year, Red Rock Lakes National Wildlife Refuge was established in southwestern Montana. The refuge protected an important remaining group of trumpeter swans and the wetlands they required. Shallow lakes, marsh vegetation, and isolated nesting places gave the birds room to feed and raise cygnets under protection. Recovery required more than leaving one surviving flock alone. Wildlife agencies moved birds and eggs into parts of the former range. Captive propagation programs raised trumpeters under managed conditions, then released young birds into suitable wetlands. Protection of breeding areas gave those releases a better chance of producing future generations. Regular surveys allowed biologists to count adults, locate nests, and measure whether new populations were becoming self-sustaining. A self-sustaining population produces enough surviving young to continue without constant releases. The wider picture changed when aircraft made remote wetlands easier to examine. During the first broad aerial survey of Alaska in 1968, observers counted 2,847 trumpeter swans. That discovery showed that a substantial northern population had survived beyond the regions where the species had seemed closest to extinction. Those birds later became important to the understanding and rebuilding of the species as a whole. Other wetland animals may have supported the recovery in quieter ways. Beavers create ponds, flooded channels, and broad areas of shallow water. Muskrats build houses from mud and vegetation. Trumpeter swans can place nests on these raised structures, gaining a foundation surrounded by water. As beaver and muskrat populations recovered in some regions, they may have increased the number of useful nesting places and restored wetland conditions that swans could occupy. By 2019, a global review estimated approximately 76,000 trumpeter swans. The change from 69 known birds in the contiguous United States to tens of thousands across the species range took decades of protection, habitat work, reintroductions, and repeated monitoring. Each part supported the others. Reduced hunting allowed adults to survive longer. Protected wetlands gave pairs places to nest. Translocated and captive raised birds established populations where local swans had vanished. The recovery returned deep calls and broad white wings to lakes that had lost them for generations. Those wings now cross a landscape filled with power lines, roads, lead fragments, and altered water systems that earlier trumpeter swans never evolved to recognize. A trumpeter leaving protected water may soon pass over roads, power lines, farm fields, and reservoirs shaped by dams. The bird has recovered within a landscape that continues to change around it. Some hazards enter the body through the same feeding behavior that once helped the species survive in shallow wetlands. Swans often search through sediment for roots, tubers, and small plant fragments. They may also swallow grit, the tiny stones birds use inside the muscular part of the stomach to help grind food. Spent lead shot and lost fishing weights can resemble those useful particles. Once swallowed, lead may remain in the digestive system and slowly dissolve. The metal enters the bloodstream and interferes with nerves, muscles, and the production of healthy blood cells. An affected swan may become weak, lose coordination, and struggle to feed or fly. A study examined 72 dead trumpeter swans collected across 7 western states. Within the Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming populations studied between 1976 and 1987, lead ingestion accounted for about 20% of known mortality. That number described one population during a defined period, yet it revealed how repeated contact with a small human-made object could affect a large protected bird. Infrastructure creates a different kind of risk. A swan approaching a familiar lake may see the broad shoreline while missing a narrow wire crossing the flight path. Power lines can be difficult to detect against grey clouds, dark trees, or evening light. Trumpeter and mute swans have both been injured or killed in collisions with wires and other structures. Their large bodies carry considerable momentum, and rapid changes of direction are difficult during takeoff or landing. Wetlands near roads, bridges, fences, and electrical lines can therefore contain food while remaining dangerous in the air above them. Other changes appear through survival rather than death. Small tracking devices now allow researchers to follow individual swans across entire seasons. A device using the Global Positioning System records locations from signals sent by satellites. Repeated positions reveal when a bird leaves, where it stops, and how far it travels before winter. Western Eurasian Buick swans have shown a major shift in this record. After 1970, their winter range moved more than 350 kilometers toward their Arctic breeding grounds. Many birds now stop farther north instead of continuing to traditional winter areas in Western Europe. This behavior is sometimes called short stopping. Warmer winters leave more northern water unfrozen and keep food available closer to the breeding range. Tracked individuals wintered about 118 kilometers nearer the breeding grounds for every rise of 1 degree Celsius in the average temperature of December and January. Cold still acts as an immediate signal. Movement increased on colder autumn days, especially when temperatures fell below freezing late in the season. Ice can cover shallow feeding water within hours, turning a useful stopover into a place the swans must leave. Individual decisions accumulate across years. When many birds respond to similar conditions, the winter range of an entire population can shift across the map. Southern species record different pressures. Australia's black swans depend on wetlands that can expand during wet years and contract sharply during drought. Water diverted for farms or cities can reduce shallow feeding areas, even before a natural dry period reaches its greatest intensity. Black-necked swans in South America face habitat loss, pollution, and major changes in water level across broad wetlands. Some populations occupy remote country where regular surveys are difficult, leaving gaps in the record of decline or recovery. Monitoring remains part of protection because counts can reveal a shrinking flock, while tracking shows where routes are changing. Examinations of dead birds identify hazards that cannot be seen from the shoreline. A swan carries these changes through its body and movement. Lead poisoning may begin during one feeding visit, while the placement of a single wire can alter the safety of a familiar flight path. Across decades, warmer winters can redraw a migration route used by thousands of birds. The swan resting on calm water has become a record of the wetland beneath it, the air above it, and the distant places connected by its flight. Returning to that still figure now reveals far more than grace alone. Across the evening surface, one swan moves through a narrow band of reflected sky. Its back remains level, while small ripples open behind the tail. Beneath the water, the rear-set feet continue their alternating strokes. Each webbed foot spreads during the push, then narrows as it returns for the following movement. The body above appears still because the effort below is balanced so carefully. Its long neck lowers toward a patch of submerged vegetation. The curve opens, the head passes through the surface, and the bill enters a layer of leaves and stems. That neck gives the bird access to food beyond the reach of many shorter waterfowl. A black swan can extend its feeding range toward plants roughly 1 meter below the surface, while keeping most of its body buoyant above. The bill grips vegetation, while fine structures along its edges allow loose water and sediment to escape. A foot may stir the bottom, helping release a buried root. When the head rises again, droplets slide over feathers that have been aligned through hours of preening. Oil from the gland near the tail supports that protection, while the overlapping feather structure forms the main barrier. Softer layers beneath hold warm air close to the skin. The smooth surface therefore depends on continual repair. Every bent section must be returned to place, and worn flight feathers must eventually be replaced during molt. When those wings are complete, they face the heaviest task in the swan's movement. A large trumpeter cannot rise straight from rest. Its feet must run across open water, while the wings gather enough airflow to support the body. The takeoff path can extend for roughly 100 meters. A quiet lake becomes part of the flight machinery, providing the runway that allows a heavy bird to enter the air. The wings themselves add sound to the scene. A flying mute swan produces a steady rhythm that may travel for more than a mile. Close calls also pass between adults and young. Hisses warn an approaching animal, while softer peeps help cygnets remain near their family. Silence was never required for grace. A second swan may now enter the open water. The two birds keep a familiar distance as they feed, rest, and watch the shoreline. Their partnership may endure through many breeding seasons because experience makes cooperation more effective. Pair bonds remain durable through repeated behavior, with some changing after death, separation, or breeding failure. At the nest site, cooperation becomes a mound of reeds and soaked vegetation. Both adults gather material for days while the female shapes a bowl above the water. Inside each large egg, warmth and humidity remain within a narrow range for more than a month. Oxygen passes through microscopic pores as the embryo grows. After hatching, the cygnets enter the water within hours, yet their development continues through an entire summer. Bones lengthen, flight muscles strengthen, and juvenile feathers replace the first grey down. Family guidance continues after the young can fly and often lasts through their first winter. The adult's warning posture also carries a clearer meaning now. Raised wings and a direct approach allow a swan to defend eggs or young before physical fighting becomes necessary. Most displays create distance, preserving energy and reducing the chance of injury to both animals. Beyond the family, the surrounding wetland supports many parts of this life. Aquatic plants supply food. Beaver ponds and muskrat houses can create nesting foundations. Open channels provide winter refuge and a place to launch. Migration connects these waters to distant feeding grounds, while warmer winters gradually shift where some swans stop. Human actions have altered those connections in opposite directions. Hunting and habitat loss reduced known trumpeter swans in the contiguous United States to 69 in 1935. Protection restored habitat, and decades of reintroduction allowed their numbers to rise again. Power lines, lead, and changing water systems continue to shape the routes they follow. The swan crossing the pond remains as beautiful as it first appeared. Its beauty now includes muscle working below the surface, feathers maintained one stroke at a time, and knowledge carried between seasons. Partnership, growth, and survival travel within the calm outline. A swan crossing still water is carrying the results of constant effort so evenly that almost none of it reaches the surface.